I'm taking back what's mine. This is
They
a secret
called it
trust.
love. My lawyer called
I
it
can help you with
fraud.
that.
When my son,
I
David,
will not
finally
be
screamed,
silenced.
"We are your family,"
birthday,
across my living
Eleanor.
room,
We can
his
move forward
face
with this.
flushed with a fury I had never been
This
allowed to
truth
see
will set us
before.
free.
I didn't flinch. I simply pushed the small audio recorder across the coffee table until it rested near his clenched fist. The tiny red light pulsed with a quiet, steady rhythm, a mechanical heartbeat counting down the seconds of his disbelief. Family is a word we will need to redefine, I said, my voice calmer than it had been in 30 years. But first, let's listen to the part where you and Sarah explain how my incompetence would make everything so much easier. That future moment, the one with the recorder and the rage, was still months away. It began, as these things so often do, with a celebration. My celebration, in fact. The scent of vanilla and too sweet buttercream frosting clung to the air in my living room, a sticky residue from the cake Sarah had insisted on buying. 72 candles would have been a fire hazard, she chirped, so a large, glittery 7 and 2 were jammed into the thick white icing instead. The small gathering, my son David, his wife Sarah, and my granddaughter Chloe, sang a strained, off-key version of Happy Birthday. I smiled, a quiet, practiced motion of my lips that didn't quite reach my eyes. For years, my smiles had felt like part of a uniform I was required to wear. After the cake was sliced and the perfunctory gifts were unwrapped, a cashmere scarf I would never wear, a book I had already read, David cleared his throat. It was a sound I knew well, a carefully rehearsed prelude to a request. Sarah, ever his partner in these productions, beamed at me, her hand resting on David's arm. "Mom," David began, his voice taking on the earnest, confidential tone he reserved for matters of finance. "We have one more gift for you. It's more of an opportunity, really. A gift that gives back." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes bright with a fervor that always made me uneasy. "It's for the family, Eleanor, for the future. It's about building your legacy." The word legacy was a weapon in her arsenal, one she wielded with surgical precision. As she spoke, she gestured with a flourish, and the light from my reading lamp caught the spray of diamonds on her wrist. The tennis bracelet was new. I had not seen it before. It was a river of cold, hard light, and I found my gaze fixed on it as she continued. "A few months ago, there had been a frantic call about a burst pipe in a flooded basement, an emergency that required a cashier's check delivered with utmost urgency. I wondered briefly if they had repaired the pipe with diamonds." David placed a slender, leather-bound folder on the coffee table beside the half-eaten slices of cake. He opened it, not toward me, but toward himself, like a magician preparing a trick. Inside, nestled in a silk pocket, was my own checkbook and my favorite fountain pen. A prop, my prop. "We found the most incredible opening," David said, his voice dropping. "A small, boutique property development, pre-construction phase. The returns are practically guaranteed, but the window to get in is closing fast." "It's the kind of thing your father would have jumped at," Sarah added softly, a phantom invoking a ghost. "He was always so savvy. He always thought about providing." I stared at the checkbook, my own checkbook, presented to me as a gift on my birthday. The irony was so profound, so suffocating, that for a moment I felt nothing at all. They weren't asking for money. They were creating a ceremony around my surrender, dressing it up in the language of love and prudence. I thought of the scarf, still in its tissue paper. It was a distraction, a bauble to dangle before the real transaction took place. "How much is the investment?" I asked. My voice sounded thin, a stranger's voice in my own home. David slid a neatly printed prospectus across the table, though he knew I wouldn't read it. A single yellow sticky note was affixed to the top, a number written in Sarah's looping, optimistic script. The figure had 5 zeros after the 7. My breath caught in my chest. It was a significant portion of what remained from my husband's life insurance policy, the fund I had mentally marked for my own final years, for the quiet dignity of not being a burden. My hand did not move toward the pen. For a full 10 seconds, I just sat there, the forced smiles on their faces beginning to stiffen. I could see the flicker of impatience in David's eyes, the slight tightening of Sarah's jaw beneath her practiced warmth. This was not part of the script. My role was to express gratitude for the opportunity and sign with a flourish of maternal generosity. "Mom, is everything all right?" David's voice was laced with a delicate, almost imperceptible thread of warning. "It's just we have to move on this by tomorrow for Chloe's future." Chloe, who had been silent and absorbed in her phone, looked up at the mention of her name, her expression neutral. She was the final piece of their leverage, the unspoken justification for every withdrawal, every loan that was never meant to be repaid. Sarah slid closer on the sofa. She placed her cool hand over mine. The diamonds on her bracelet pressed into my skin. "Think of it, Eleanor," she murmured, her voice a silken net. "An inheritance they can use now while you're here to see it. A legacy of action, not just a number in a bank account when you're gone." The words, "when you're gone," were not a threat, but a statement of fact, a reminder of my own obsolescence. My usefulness was tethered to my assets, and both were dwindling. The fight went out of me, a quiet internal deflation. What was the point of resisting? It would only lead to pained looks, to weeks of wounded silence, to accusations of not trusting my own son. It was easier to sign. It had always been easier to sign. My fingers, stiff with age, closed around the familiar weight of the pen. With Sarah's hand still resting on mine, a gesture of loving support that felt more like a guide's grip, I wrote the date, the name of the anonymous LLC, and the staggering number. My signature, once a firm, confident script, was a little shaky. As I pushed the checkbook back across the table, the sense of relief from David and Sarah was a palpable force in the room. The party could now officially conclude. Their love, having been duly purchased, was renewed for another term. The silence they left behind was louder than their singing. It settled in the corners of the room, seeped into the upholstery, and lay across the dining table with the dirty cake plates and crumpled napkins. I sat in my armchair, the new cashmere scarf draped over the back, its softness a mockery of the evening's harsh transaction. The house, my home for 45 years, suddenly felt cavernous, its familiar echoes replaced by a profound and hollow quiet. This was the price of their visit, a large signed check and a silence filled with the ghosts of what I had given away. My mind drifted backward, unspooling years of similar moments, each one a thread in the same fraying tapestry. The down payment for David and Sarah's first home, a loan that was quietly forgotten when their second child was on the way. The $5,000 to launch David's bespoke consulting firm, a venture that dissolved in less than a year with nothing to show for it but a glossy website. The frantic call from an airport in Italy, a lost wallet, a stolen passport, requiring an immediate wire transfer to salvage Chloe's irreplaceable cultural experience. Each request had been framed as a crisis, an investment, a necessity. Each had been wrapped in the language of love, of family obligation, of a shared future I was apparently required to underwrite. They weren't thefts, they were emotional surcharges, the cost of being a mother. I rose from my chair, my joints aching with a weariness that had little to do with age. As I collected the plates, my gaze fell upon the bookshelf that housed my late husband Arthur's collection of maritime histories. Arthur was a man of ledgers and logic, an accountant who found solace in the clear, immutable truth of numbers. He believed in structure, in balanced accounts, in planning for storms. His passing, 10 years ago, had felt like the demolition of a seawall I hadn't even known was protecting me. On impulse, I left the dishes and walked into his study. The room was much as he had left it, smelling faintly of old paper and the pipe tobacco had given up years before he died. I ran my hand over the smooth, worn wood of his roll-top desk. It was here he had managed our lives, turning his modest salary and my librarian's income into a comfortable, secure future. A future I was now dismantling, check by check. I slid open the bottom right drawer, the one that always stuck slightly. It was filled with old tax returns, warranties for appliances now long gone, and at the very back, a heavy, leather-bound book. His personal financial ledger. I hadn't opened it since he died. The sight of his precise, angular handwriting had been too painful. But tonight, the pain was eclipsed by a different, colder feeling, a need to know, a need to see the architecture of my own ruin. I carried the book to the living room and sat under the glow of the reading lamp. The first pages were a testament to Arthur's foresight. He had chronicled everything: the growth of his pension, the returns on our modest stock portfolio, the final payout from his life insurance, the very fund I had just raided. His entries were dated, sourced, and annotated with small, meticulous notes. Market dip, buy utilities, shifted assets to lower-risk bonds. He had built a fortress. I turned the pages, my heart sinking with each one. My own entries began a few months after his last. They were sporadic at first, the handwriting less steady. David, house deposit. The number was stark, stripped of the emotional packaging that had come with it. A few pages later, David, business startup. Then another and another. They were wounds on the page. The meticulous balance Arthur had so carefully curated was gone, replaced by a steep, undeniable decline. The numbers didn't lie. They didn't offer comfort or excuses. They simply testified to a decade of relentless erosion. I had been standing on a cliff, admiring the view, while my children shoveled the ground from under my feet. My fingers trembled as I reached the last few entries. There were only a handful of empty pages left. But tucked into the very back sleeve, I found a sealed envelope addressed to me in his hand. Inside was a single sheet of his old company letterhead. The note was brief. Eleanor, if you are reading this, it means the regular accounts are running low. I suspected this might happen. David is a good man, but he has my charm and his mother's open heart, a dangerous combination with money. Look at the last page. Always, A. My breath hitched. With fumbling fingers, I turned to the final, unnumbered page of the ledger. It was a single entry, dated 1 week before his final hospitalization. The heading was written in firm, deliberate letters, the Breakwater Fund. Below it was the name of a different bank, an account number I didn't recognize, and a starting principal that made me gasp. It was a separate, untouchable account he had created without my knowledge. A final, secret act of protection. Beneath the account details, he had written one last sentence, a command that felt like a plea across time. This is for you, Eleanor, for you alone. Do not let the waves pull it down. I closed the ledger and held it to my chest. The cool leather felt like an anchor in the swirling chaos of my emotions. The check I had written tonight was not just another withdrawal. It was a betrayal of this man, this fortress, this final, desperate act of love. The echoes in the quiet house were no longer just sad. They were a call to arms. This book, this record of loss, was also a map. It showed me exactly what had been taken, and in Arthur's last message, it showed me where to find the high ground. Arthur's ledger sat on my nightstand, a silent, leather-bound accusation. In the 2 weeks since my birthday, I had read and reread his final note, the words a mantra of warning and protection. The knowledge of the Breakwater Fund was a secret warmth I hugged to myself, a shield against the chill that had settled in my heart after writing that check. I had no idea how literal that chill was about to become. It began subtly. I woke one morning to a deep, penetrating cold that the thickest quilt couldn't fend off. My breath plumed in the air. A quick glance at the thermostat confirmed my suspicion. The digital display was blank, and the house was unnervingly silent. The familiar, comforting rumble of the boiler in the basement was gone. Outside, a cruel November wind rattled the window panes, and the first hard frost of the season had silvered the lawn. The temperature had plunged overnight. I pulled on a heavy wool sweater and went downstairs. The air was colder with every step, a descent into an icy well. In the basement, the boiler stood inert, its pilot light extinguished. It was an old, cantankerous machine, but it had been reliable. Now it was just a hulking mass of cold iron. A faint smell of gas hung in the air, just enough to be unsettling. My first instinct, a reflex honed over a decade of widowhood, was to call David. He had always handled these things, the leaky faucet, the sputtering lawnmower, the furnace inspection. It was part of his role as the man of the family, a role he performed with a show of dutiful competence, often followed by a gentle suggestion that the house was becoming too much for me. This time, however, my hand hesitated over the phone. The memory of my birthday, of his eager hand taking the check, was too fresh. But the house was getting colder by the minute. My fingers were stiff, and a deep ache was settling into my bones. This wasn't a matter of pride, it was a matter of survival. Swallowing the bitter taste of doubt, I dialed his number. He answered on the third ring, his voice breathless and energetic. "Hey, Mom, can't talk long. I'm on site. What's up?" "David, the heat is off," I said, my voice tight. "The boiler isn't working. I think the pilot light is out, and I can smell a little gas." There was a pause. I heard the muffled sound of voices in the background, a hammer striking metal. He was at the development, the opportunity I had funded. "Oh, shoot, that's a pain," he said, his tone casual, distracted. "Did you try relighting it?" "I don't know, David. Arthur always did it. And with the smell—" Right. Don't mess with it then," he said quickly. "Look, I'm absolutely slammed. We're trying to get the foundation poured before the ground freezes solid, and the foreman is breathing down my neck. I can't possibly get away." The excuse was so reasonable, so practical, yet it felt like a door slamming shut in my face. "I see," I said softly. "It's just that it's freezing in here." "I know, Mom, I know. Winter, right?" He laughed, a short, barking sound with no humor in it. Then came the words that fractured a lifetime of belief. "Listen, why don't you just call a repair service? You've got the funds for it. That's what an emergency fund is for, isn't it? To be independent." Independent. The word hung in the air between us, a piece of glittering, jagged ice. He was using my money as a reason to deny me his time, his help, his care. The transaction was complete. I had paid for the privilege of being left alone. My financial capacity was not a safety net. It was his excuse. I was not a mother in need. I was a self-sufficient entity who could solve her own problems with the money she should be grateful to still possess. "I suppose so," I managed to say. The cold wasn't just in the house anymore. It was inside me, a paralytic frost spreading through my veins. "Great, that's my girl," he said, the false praise of a parent placating a child. "Gotta run, Mom. The concrete truck is here. We'll talk soon. Love you." The line went dead. I stood in the glacial silence of my kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear. He had not asked if I had a blanket. He had not asked if I had somewhere else to go. He had not offered to send Sarah or Chloe to check on me. He had simply outsourced the problem, using my own checkbook as his referral. The illusion of family, of mutual care, did not fade gently. It shattered. It fell away in sharp, glittering pieces, and what was left was the stark, undeniable truth. To my son, I was no longer a mother to be cared for, but an account to be managed. I lowered the phone and looked at my own reflection in the dark kitchen window. An old woman, alone in a freezing house. A foolish old woman. But as I stared, another feeling began to surface, pushing through the ice of shock and sorrow. It was a slow, burning ember of anger. Arthur's last words echoed in my mind. Do not let the waves pull it down. David was a wave, crashing against the foundation of my life. For years, I had mistaken the erosion for the ebb and flow of love. I walked over to the kitchen drawer and pulled out the thick yellow pages, the weight of it unfamiliar in my hands. I would not call him back. I would not beg. I would not give him the satisfaction of my tears. My finger, numb with cold, traced the listings under H, heating furnace repair. I would make the call myself. It was a small act, a simple phone call, but it felt like the first breath after being held underwater for a very, very long time. The repairman was a young man with kind eyes who didn't ask any questions. He replaced a thermocouple, cleaned the jets, and the old boiler roared back to life with a comforting shudder. The house was warm again, but the heat felt artificial, a thin layer of comfort over a deep internal frost. I paid him from my housekeeping cash, and the act of handing over the bills felt significant. It was my money, spent on my problem, solved by my own hand. The independence David had thrown in my face was a bitter pill, but I was beginning to feel its medicinal effects. In the days that followed, the warmth of the house became a sort of incubator for my anger. It was a quiet, slow-burning thing. I moved through my routines, washing dishes, sorting laundry, dusting bookshelves, and with each mundane task, a new memory would surface. Sarah, admiring my pearl necklace a little too intently, and David, a week later, suggesting I sell it to help with a short-term cash flow problem for his business. The time they convinced me to co-sign a car loan, assuring me it was just a formality. The vague explanations about where the money from my sold dividend stocks had gone. Each memory was a small cut, and I was finally beginning to see that I was bleeding out. I couldn't talk to my friends. What would I say? That my son, the boy I had raised to be a good man, was treating me like an open line of credit? The shame was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. To admit my situation would be to admit my own failure, my own gullibility. It would invite pity, and pity was the one thing I could not bear. But Arthur's ledger and his secret note demanded action. I needed a plan, and I needed an ally, a dispassionate one. One afternoon, while sorting through a stack of old mail, I found a newsletter from the local community center. Tucked in the back was a small, unassuming advertisement, Seniors Legal Aid Clinic, free confidential consultations, Wednesdays, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. It was held in the basement of a church on the other side of town, a place of blessed anonymity. The following Wednesday, I dressed in an old tweed coat, something that wouldn't draw attention, and took the bus. The church basement smelled of stale coffee and damp concrete. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale, clinical glow on the handful of other people waiting on mismatched metal chairs. They sat in silence, clutching manila folders or worn handbags, their faces etched with the quiet anxiety of those who have run out of options. I saw my own fear reflected in their eyes and felt a strange kinship, a shared membership in a club no one ever wants to join. When my name was called, I was led to a small, partitioned-off area where a young man sat at a folding table. He looked barely older than Chloe. He had sharp, intelligent eyes and wore a crisp, simple suit that seemed a bit too formal for the setting. He stood as I approached and extended a hand. "Mrs. Vance? I'm Marcus Chen. Please, have a seat." I sat, clutching my purse in my lap. I had rehearsed a gentle, roundabout way of explaining my situation, a narrative of maternal support and family investments. But looking at his direct, no-nonsense expression, the carefully constructed story crumbled. "How can I help you today?" he asked, his voice calm and even. I'm here for some advice," I began, my voice faltering. "It's about my family. My son. I've been helping him, financially." He nodded, his gaze unwavering. He opened a plain legal pad and picked up a pen. He didn't offer platitudes or comforting murmurs. He just waited. "They had an opportunity, a property development," I continued, the familiar words feeling hollow and false as I said them. "A gift that gives back," they called it, "for my legacy." Mr. Chen wrote something down. "And how did you facilitate this gift, Mrs. Vance?" I wrote a check. "From a joint account?" "No, my personal account." "Was this documented as a loan?" he asked, his eyes lifting from the pad to meet mine. "No, of course not. He's my son." "So it was a gift," he stated, not as a question, but as a classification. He made another note. "Has this happened before, these large gifts?" The floodgates opened. I told him everything, the words tumbling out in a disorganized rush. The down payment, the failed business, the emergency in Italy. With each example, he would ask a quiet, incisive question. "Did you have a conversation about repayment? Was there any pressure applied? Did they suggest that failing to provide the funds would have negative consequences for your relationship?" His questions were like a surgeon's scalpels, methodically cutting away the layers of sentimentality and emotional blackmail to expose the stark structure beneath. He wasn't asking how I felt. He was asking what happened. Finally, I fell silent, exhausted and exposed. The story of my love and generosity, when laid out under the harsh fluorescent lights of that basement, looked ugly. It looked like a long series of transactions where I was the only one paying. Mr. Chen put down his pen. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his tone still perfectly level, "what you describe as helping your son, the law has other names for. Undue influence, potential breach of fiduciary duty if he has any formal control over your finances. At its most basic, it's a pattern of financial exploitation." The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. Exploitation. It was a cold, brutal word. It was a word for strangers, for con artists. It was not a word for a son. He saw the shock on my face. "Feelings aren't evidence," he said, his voice softening just a fraction. "Right now, what you have is a story. To do anything, we need proof. We need a paper trail." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a simple white business card. "Marcus Chen, Esquire, Elverlaw." He slid it across the table. "Go home," he said, his voice now a clear, low command. "Find everything. Bank statements, canceled checks, letters, emails. Buy a notebook and start a journal. Document every conversation you've had about money and every conversation you will have from this day forward. Write down dates, times, amounts, and the exact words used. Be a librarian, Mrs. Vance. Catalog everything. When you have built a file, when you have turned your memories into a record, call me. Then we can talk about a strategy." I took the card. The crisp corner of the cardstock pressed into my palm. It was just a small piece of paper, but it felt like a weapon. I left the church basement and stepped out into the bright, cold afternoon. The shame was still there, but it was no longer a weight. It was fuel. I had a task, I had a direction, and I had a stranger's card in my pocket. Mr. Chen's words, "be a librarian," echoed in my mind. It was a role I knew well. For 40 years, I had organized information, cataloged facts, and created order out of chaos. Now, I was to be the archivist of my own life's dismantling. I started with a simple spiral notebook, its cover a cheerful, mocking yellow. On the first page, I wrote the date, and then, from memory, I documented the conversation with David about the boiler. I recounted his exact words, his tone of dismissal, the casual way he had directed me to my own emergency fund. The act of writing it down gave it a terrible permanence. My real work, however, lay in the attic. For days, the house was filled with the sounds of my excavation. I dragged heavy boxes of old paperwork down the rickety attic ladder, the dust making me sneeze, the scent of decaying paper filling the air. It was a journey through a past I had never properly examined. I unearthed 2 decades of bank statements, tax returns, and investment reports, most of them still in their sealed envelopes. Arthur had always handled this side of our lives, and after he was gone, I had simply filed things away, trusting that David was keeping an eye on things for me as he'd promised. I spread the documents across the dining room table, transforming it from a place of fraught family dinners into a forensic workstation. Methodically, I created piles by year. With Arthur's ledger as my guide and my new journal as my log, I began to build the record Mr. Chin had requested. The pattern emerged with sickening clarity. It started small. In the first few years after Arthur's death, there were modest checks written to David or Sarah, logged in my check register with notations like birthday or Christmas. Then the amounts grew. A transfer of $10,000 coincided with the memory of a new deck they had built. Another, for $15,000, appeared around the time Chloe was enrolled in a prestigious private middle school. There were no loan agreements, no notes in the memo lines, just a one-way river of cash flowing out of my account and into theirs. As I worked my way closer to the present, the withdrawals became larger and more frequent. I found the statement showing the wire transfer to Italy. It was for far more than I remembered. And I found the cashed check for the flooded basement. It was dated just 2 days before I'd first seen Sarah's new diamond tennis bracelet. My stomach tightened into a cold knot. The connection wasn't just a suspicion. It was a black and white fact on a bank statement. The most damning discoveries, however, were not in the bank boxes. They were in a file marked personal estate that David had helped me organize 3 years ago. He had brought the papers to my house, explaining it was just some routine stuff to make things easier as I got older. We'd had tea, he'd been charming and attentive, and I'd signed where he told me to sign. At the time, I'd felt a surge of gratitude for his attentiveness. Now, under the harsh light of my desk lamp, I read the documents properly for the first time. Tucked between a living will and my healthcare directives was another document, a durable power of attorney. It was broad and sweeping, granting David full authority over all my financial affairs, effective immediately. He could sell my property, access my accounts, and manage my investments without any oversight. He had become the legal master of my entire financial life, and I had handed him the keys with a trusting smile. I sank into my chair, the document trembling in my hand. He hadn't just been asking for money, he had given himself the legal right to take it. How many times had he used this authority? My online banking skills were rudimentary, but I knew I had to learn. That afternoon, I spent 2 frustrating hours on the phone with the bank's technical support, a patient young woman walking me through the process of setting up my online access. When I finally logged in and saw the transaction history for myself, the scale of the deception became breathtaking. There were recurring monthly transfers from my savings to an account I didn't recognize. There were withdrawals from ATMs in towns I had never visited. He hadn't even bothered to be subtle. The power of attorney had made him bold. He wasn't just my son asking for help. He was an administrator, dispersing funds as he saw fit. My funds. The paper trail was no longer a collection of sad memories. It was a detailed indictment. Mr. Chen had asked me to catalog everything, and I had. The dining room table was covered in evidence, bank statements flagged with sticky notes, copies of canceled checks, and at the center of it all, the power of attorney, a testament to my own misplaced trust. Arthur had built a fortress and a breakwater, but I had left the front gate open and handed the warden the key. The sheer, calculated audacity of it left me breathless. This wasn't a series of poor choices on his part. It was a strategy. It was a long, patient, and devastatingly effective campaign. My dining room table remained a sea of damning paper. For a week, I lived with the evidence of my own fleecing, the sheer volume of it, a constant, low-grade hum of anger beneath the surface of my days. I had not yet called Mr. Chen. I felt I needed to hold the knowledge myself for a while, to let its sharp edges scour away the last vestiges of my denial. I was no longer a victim. I was an investigator, and I was waiting. I knew, with the certainty of a meteorologist predicting a recurring storm, that David would call. The call came on a Tuesday morning. The caller ID flashed his name, and my heart gave a single hard thump against my ribs. I picked up my yellow notebook and a pen, took a slow, deep breath, and answered. "Hi, Mom. How are you doing?" His voice was a cheerful wave of practiced warmth, the voice he used when the barometer of his bank account was falling. It was the voice of a man about to ask for a favor. "I'm well, David, and you?" I kept my tone level, a placid surface over the turbulent water beneath. "Fantastic, really fantastic. The development is moving along ahead of schedule. Your investment is already looking brilliant." He laid the groundwork with flattery, attributing his success to my funding. It was a classic tactic. Make me feel like a valued partner, a savvy stakeholder. "That's good to hear," I said. "Yeah, it's great, which actually brings me to why I'm calling. The pivot. You know, Chloe has been getting her early admission letters back. Well, she got into Georgetown. We're all just over the moon." My heart swelled with genuine pride for my granddaughter. Chloe was a bright, serious girl. "Oh, David, that's wonderful news. Please tell her how proud I am." "I will, Mom, I will. She's thrilled." He paused, letting the good news settle, creating a shared moment of familial joy before leveraging it. "The thing is, the first tuition deposit is due in a couple of weeks to secure her spot. It's a bit sooner than we'd planned for, and with all our liquid assets tied up in the property, well, you know how it is." I knew exactly how it was. I looked at a bank statement on the table in front of me, at a highlighted withdrawal of $20,000 made just 6 months prior, with a memo line entered by David using his power of attorney that read, "Family vacation." I imagined the interest on that vacation could have paid for Chloe's deposit. "We were thinking," he went on, his voice dropping into that familiar confidential tone, "that it would be a wonderful gift from you to her. A grandmother's contribution to her future. We need to transfer about $25,000 to cover the deposit and initial fees." He didn't ask, he stated the need, assigned me the role of benefactor, and named the price. It was a transaction presented as a tender family moment. For 20 years, my response had been some version of course. I looked at the power of attorney document, lying like a coiled snake in the center of the table. I thought of the secret Breakwater Fund, the fortress Arthur had built for me. I thought of the cold in my house and the cold in his voice when he had told me to hire a plumber. The architecture of my life was collapsing, but I had found a new blueprint. It was a small, simple design built around a single word. "No," I said. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was so profound, I thought for a moment the call had dropped. I could hear the faint hum of the connection, a carrier wave of pure shock. "What?" David finally said, the single word sharp with disbelief, as if I had just started speaking in a foreign language. "No," I repeated. The word felt solid in my mouth, a stone. It was easier to say the second time. "I'm not going to be giving you any more money, David." The warmth in his voice instantly evaporated, like water on a hot skillet. "What are you talking about? This isn't for me, Mom. This is for Chloe. This is for her future, for Georgetown." He was already turning the tables, reframing my refusal not as a boundary with him, but as a punishment for my granddaughter. Close education is very important, I agreed calmly, my pen scratching in my notebook as I transcribed his words. But the answer is no. His voice began to rise, shedding its velvet glove to reveal the iron fist of entitlement. I don't understand. Are you feeling all right? You sound strange. Is something wrong? It was the next step in the playbook, question my competence. My refusal could not be a rational decision. It had to be a symptom of confusion, of decline. I am feeling perfectly fine, David. My thinking has never been clearer. Clearer? He gave a short, incredulous laugh. Mom, you're not making any sense. We've always been a family that supports each other. You helped me, you helped us. That's what you do. It's Chloe's turn now. Don't you want to see her succeed? The emotional blackmail was so blatant, so textbook, that I almost felt a detached sense of academic interest. He was accusing me of withholding love, of sabotaging my own grandchild because I was refusing to hand over more money. He saw no difference between my bank account and my heart. My support for this family has been unconditional, I said, my own voice hardening now. My financial contributions, however, have reached their condition. The answer is no. That was when the facade crumbled completely. The dutiful son vanished, replaced by a petulant, enraged stranger. After everything I do for you, he sputtered, his voice thick with indignation. I manage your accounts, I look after the house, I make sure you're taken care of, and this is the thanks I get? A no when your granddaughter's future is on the line? My God, you've become a selfish old woman. The insult, designed to wound me, did the opposite. It clarified everything. In his world, his help was a service for which I paid, and my refusal to pay was an act of selfish betrayal. The last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Thank you for your perspective, David, I said, my voice as cold and clear as ice. I have to go now. Before he could unleash another volley of accusations, I ended the call. I sat in the silence, my hand resting on the phone. My heart was pounding, but I felt a strange, exhilarating calm. I had built the wall. I had said the word. And in his rage, he had shown me his true face. I picked up Mr. Chen's card from the table. It was time to make the call. EOT. The moment I ended the call with David, I picked the phone up again. My fingers were steady as I dialed the number from the business card. The voice that answered was not Mr. Chen's, but a crisp, professional receptionist who took my name. "One moment, Mrs. Vance," she said. Less than a minute later, his voice came on the line, the same calm, even tone I remembered from the church basement. "Mrs. Vance, you've been busy, I take it." "Yes," I said, looking at the mountain of paper on my table. "I have a record. I believe you called it a paper trail." "Good. Can you be at my office tomorrow at 10? It was a command, not a question. This was no longer a free clinic consultation. This was the beginning of a campaign. His office was in a modest downtown building, a world away from the damp church basement. The walls were lined with books, not law books, but histories and biographies. He saw me looking at them. "I find it helps to study how people behave, not just how the law says they should," he explained, gesturing for me to sit. I had brought a large satchel with me. Inside was Arthur's ledger, my yellow notebook, and a meticulously organized accordion file containing the bank statements, the canceled checks, and the power of attorney. I didn't speak. I simply took the file out and placed it on the polished surface of his desk. For nearly an hour, he went through the documents in silence, his expression unreadable. He turned pages, his eyes scanning columns of figures, occasionally making a note on his legal pad. He read my journal entries. He examined the power of attorney with a focus so intense it seemed he might set the paper alight. When he finally looked up, his gaze was direct and serious. "He has stripped this account bare, Mrs. Vance. The power of attorney gave him the key, and he has been emptying the house room by room." "I know," I said. My voice was quiet but firm. "What he doesn't know about," he continued, tapping the cover of Arthur's ledger, which I had explained, "is the Breakwater Fund. That is our primary tactical advantage. He believes your resources are nearly exhausted, which is why he is escalating his demands. He's getting desperate." He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "We are going to take 3 immediate, non-negotiable actions. They are defensive. They are about containment. This is not the time for offense. This is the time to secure the gates." I nodded, ready to receive my orders. "First," he said, sliding a single-page document across the desk, "we revoke the power of attorney. This document, once signed by you, notarized, and delivered to your son and your financial institutions, will sever his legal access to your affairs. He will be locked out. It is the legal equivalent of changing the locks on your bank accounts." He explained the process. A courier would deliver a copy to David's home and office. The banks would be notified by registered mail. It would be an unequivocal, legally binding declaration. I picked up the pen he offered. It felt heavier than the one I had used to sign David's check. This signature was an act of reclamation, not surrender. I signed my name, my hand perfectly steady. "Second," Mr. Chen went on, "we protect the assets, all of them, especially the Breakwater Fund. We are going to establish a revocable living trust. You will be the sole trustee. Your assets, including your home and your bank accounts, will be moved into this trust. You still control everything, but the ownership is legally transferred to the trust entity." I picked up the pen he offered. It felt heavier than the one I had used to sign David's check. This signature was an act of reclamation, not surrender. I signed my name, my hand perfectly steady. "Second," Mr. Chen went on, "we protect the assets, all of them, especially the Breakwater Fund. We are going to establish a revocable living trust. You will be the sole trustee. Your assets, including your home and your bank accounts, will be moved into this trust. You still control everything, but the ownership is legally transferred to the trust entity." It creates a powerful new barrier against any claims of incompetence or attempts to seize control through other means. It's a fortress, Mrs. Vance, and you hold the only key. He spent the next hour explaining the mechanics, drawing diagrams on his notepad, answering my questions with patience and precision. It was complex, but the goal was simple: to build the walls Arthur had wanted for me. We would begin the process of retitling the assets immediately. And third, he said, his expression becoming less that of a lawyer and more that of a security consultant, "this is a practical step, not a legal one, but it is just as important. David has a key to your house, I presume?" "Yes, for emergencies." His definition of an emergency and yours are no longer aligned, Mr. Chen stated flatly. "When he receives the revocation notice, he will likely be angry. He may come to your home to confront you, to persuade you, to intimidate you. Your home must be your sanctuary. As of today, it needs to be exclusively yours. You will call a locksmith today. You will have all the exterior locks changed. Do not give a new key to anyone." The thought sent a shiver of both fear and resolve through me. Changing the locks. It was so simple, so physical. It was a declaration of sovereignty over my own space. It was turning the polite sign on the gate from "please close the gate" to "no trespassing." I left his office with a list of tasks and a sense of profound, purposeful clarity. The weight of the decision was immense, but it was a clean weight, like a heavy, protective blanket. I went straight to the bank and began the paperwork for the trust. Then I went home. That afternoon, a locksmith's van pulled into my driveway. A quiet, efficient man worked for an hour, drilling and fitting. He handed me 2 new, gleaming brass keys. They felt foreign in my palm. After he left, I stood in my silent hallway. The phone had not rung. The confrontation was yet to come. I walked to the front door, the new key in my hand. I inserted it into the lock. The mechanism was stiff, unfamiliar. I turned the key, and the deadbolt slid home with a solid, definitive thunk. It was a sound of finality, a sound of separation. It was the sound of a gate, long left open, finally being secured against the storm. The courier's delivery confirmation and the locksmith's receipt lay on my hall table like twin declarations of independence. For 2 days, an unnerving quiet descended. David didn't call. I knew this wasn't peace. It was the eerie calm before a storm. He had received the revocation notice. He had likely tried to use his power of attorney for some transaction and been denied. He would have discovered he was locked out. The silence was the sound of him and Sarah plotting their next move. Mr. Chen had been explicit. They will shift tactics, he'd warned. When financial leverage fails, they will pivot to question your mental capacity. It's the classic next step. Be ready. On his advice, I had learned how to use the voice memo function on my smartphone. It was a simple one-touch operation. I practiced it until it was second nature, the phone becoming an extension of my memory, a silent, impartial witness. They arrived on a Saturday afternoon. I was in the living room reading when their car pulled into the driveway. There was no phone call to announce their visit. This was not a social call. It was an ambush. The doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent peal. Before I moved to answer it, I placed my phone on the side table, its screen dark. I pressed the small red button to begin recording. Then, taking a deep, fortifying breath, I went to the door. Through the peephole, I saw them standing on my porch, their faces arranged into masks of deep, solemn concern. David was holding a bouquet of grocery store carnations, a laughably transparent prop. Sarah stood beside him, her hand on his arm, her expression one of pained sympathy. It was a perfectly staged tableau of loving, worried children. I opened the door, but left the security chain engaged. "David, Sarah, this is a surprise." "Mom," David said, his voice thick with counterfeit emotion, "we've been so worried. You haven't been answering our calls." It was a lie. He hadn't called since our last conversation. "I've been busy," I said, my voice neutral. Sarah leaned forward, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Eleanor, can we please come in? We need to talk. We're worried sick about you." I hesitated for a moment, then slowly unlatched the chain. I was not afraid of them, not anymore. I had a lawyer, I had a plan, and I had a silent witness recording every word. I opened the door. "Come in." They swept into the house, their eyes darting around as if looking for signs of squalor or decay. Sarah ran a finger along a dusty bookshelf, a subtle gesture of disapproval. David placed the funereal carnations on the coffee table. "Mom, what is going on?" David began, dispensing with any pretense of small talk. He gestured vaguely around the room. First that bizarre phone call, then this. He held up a crumpled piece of paper, the revocation notice from Mr. Chen's office. "We got this letter from some lawyer. It's nonsense, of course. You've clearly been confused, taken advantage of by someone." "I haven't been confused at all," I said, taking my seat in my armchair, a queen on her throne. "I hired an attorney. I have revoked your power of attorney. It was a necessary step." Sarah gasped, placing a hand to her chest in a theatrical display of shock. "Hired an attorney? Against your own family? Eleanor, who has been putting these ideas in your head? You've been so isolated lately. Are you eating properly? Have you been forgetting things?" It had begun. The gentle, concerned questions designed to paint a picture of a dotty old woman, easily influenced and unable to manage her own affairs. Every question was a seed of doubt they hoped to plant for a future competency hearing. My memory and my diet are both excellent, thank you, Sarah, I replied, my voice cool. David took a different tack, one of wounded filial love. Mom, how could you do this to me, to us, after all I've done to help you manage things, to protect you? Don't you trust me? Trust is an interesting word, David, I said, meeting his gaze. I trusted you when you said you needed a loan for a flooded basement. Was that before or after Sarah got her new diamond bracelet? Sarah's face went rigid. The mask of concern slipped, revealing a flash of pure fury before it was hastily rearranged. David paled. What are you talking about? That has nothing to do with anything. You're mixing things up, Mom. See, this is what we're worried about. You're getting paranoid. Am I? I leaned forward slightly. Let's talk about the power of attorney. You told me it was routine paperwork to make things easier. You did not tell me it gave you the right to make monthly transfers from my savings into your personal accounts. Was that also to make things easier for me? The direct hit left them momentarily speechless. They exchanged a rapid, panicked glance. They had underestimated me. They had expected tears, confusion, a woman they could easily overwhelm with guilt and gaslighting. They had not expected a woman who had done her homework. Sarah recovered first. She knelt by the side of my chair, taking my hand in hers. Her touch was cold. "Sweetheart," she crooned, her voice dripping with condescension. "You've been looking at complicated financial papers. It's easy to misunderstand them. That's why David was handling it all for you, to take that burden off your shoulders. We love you. We just want what's best for you. Sometimes that means making decisions that are hard to understand." It was a masterful performance of infantilization. She was patting my hand, speaking to me as one would to a confused child. It was all for the benefit of a theoretical future audience, a judge, a doctor, a social worker. "I understand perfectly," I said, pulling my hand away from hers. "I understand that my money is gone, and I understand that you are now in my home, uninvited, trying to convince me I've lost my mind because I've stopped you from taking more." The atmosphere in the room turned venomous. The pretense was over. "This is that lawyer," David spat, his face contorted with rage. "He's a parasite, preying on lonely old women. We are your family. We are the ones who care about your wellness." "My wellness," I repeated, the word tasting like poison. "Is that what this is? A wellness check?" "Yes," he shouted, "and frankly, you're failing it. You're erratic, you're paranoid, and you're making terrible decisions. If you won't let us help you, we'll have to find other ways to ensure you're taken care of for your own good." It was a threat, clear and unambiguous. He was threatening to have me declared incompetent. He had said the quiet part out loud. And my phone, resting silently on the side table, had captured every single word. After the wellness ambush, I emailed the audio file to Mr. Chen with a simple subject line, "Evidence." His reply was brief and immediate. "This is a game changer. Stay the course. Do not engage." The failed confrontation seemed to chasten them, at least for a time. A week passed in blessed, unbroken silence. They were regrouping, devising a new line of attack. I knew their arsenal was not yet empty. They had one final weapon, one they had saved for last because it was the most potent. My granddaughter. The next visitor did not ring the doorbell. A soft knock, hesitant and light, sounded at the door one afternoon. I looked through the peehole and my heart ached. It was Chloe, standing alone on the porch, hugging her arms against the chill. She looked small and vulnerable. This was their cruelest gambit. Using a child to fight their battles. Using my own love for her as a lever to pry open my wallet. I unchained the door and opened it. "Chloe, come in, dear." She stepped inside, avoiding my eyes. She was a lovely girl, with my husband's thoughtful brow and a quiet intensity that I had always admired. Now her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, as if she had been crying. "Grandma," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "can we talk?" "Of course. Let's sit." I led her to the living room. She perched on the edge of the sofa, looking deeply uncomfortable. The performance had begun. "Mom and Dad told me you weren't feeling well," she said, twisting a loose thread on her sweater, "and that you were angry with them about my college money." "What I feel about your parents is a separate matter, Chloe," I said gently. "This doesn't have to involve you." "But it does involve me," she burst out, and the first tears began to spill down her cheeks. "It's Georgetown. It's my dream, Grandma. You've always told me to follow my dreams." The words were a direct hit, a line I was certain had been fed to her by Sarah. The guilt was a heavy, familiar cloak they were trying to drape over my shoulders. My heart ached for this girl, caught in the middle of a war she hadn't started. I could see the genuine fear in her eyes, the fear of a dream being snatched away. But I could also see the faint, telltale signs of coaching in her rehearsed distress. "I am so incredibly proud that you were accepted to Georgetown," I said, my voice full of sincere warmth. "It is a monumental achievement." "But I can't go if the deposit isn't paid," she sobbed, the tears coming faster now. "Dad said his project, your project, has all their money tied up. He said you were the only one who could help. He said you didn't want to. Why are you doing this to me, to the family?" There it was, the accusation, wrapped in a teenager's tears. I was the saboteur, the destroyer of dreams, the one tearing the family apart. I looked at my granddaughter, this bright young woman being used as a pawn, and I felt a surge of anger, not at her, but for her. They were willing to mortgage her emotional well-being for a chance at my bank account. I did not try to defend myself. I did not try to explain her parents' long history of deceit. That would be just as cruel, putting her in an even more impossible position. Instead, I decided on a different strategy. I would bypass them entirely. I stood up and went to my late husband's desk. From a drawer, I took out a fresh sheet of paper and a pen. I returned to the sofa and sat beside her. "Chloe," I said, my voice calm and businesslike, which seemed to startle her out of her crying. "Your education is the most important thing in the world to me. I would never, ever do anything to jeopardize it. You have earned your place at that university, and you are going to go." She looked at me, her tear-streaked face a mixture of hope and confusion. "But Mom and Dad said you said no." "I said no to giving your parents any more money," I clarified. "I did not say no to you." I placed the paper on the coffee table. "I am going to make you a proposal, and this proposal is between you and me. Your parents are not a part of it." Her eyes widened. This was not in her script. "I am going to work with my attorney," I explained, "to set up an irrevocable educational trust. Your name will be on it. The trust will be funded with enough money to cover your entire 4 years of tuition, fees, room, and board at Georgetown. The funds can be used for nothing else. The tuition bills will be paid directly from the trust to the university. Your parents will never touch a single dollar of it." She stared at me, speechless. The tears had stopped. A look of dawning comprehension was spreading across her face. She was a smart girl. She was beginning to understand. "This trust will secure your education, completely and totally," I continued. "It is my gift to you, and only to you. It is not a loan. It is your inheritance, given now for the purpose you have earned. This is my offer. Do you accept?" For a long moment, she said nothing. She looked from my face to the blank piece of paper on the table. She was processing the implications, realizing that I was offering her everything she wanted while cutting her parents out of the equation entirely. I had called their bluff. They had sent her to plead for money, and I had offered her a future free from their financial strings. Finally, she gave a small, jerky nod. A single, genuine tear traced a new path down her cheek. "Yes, Grandma," she whispered. "Yes." "Good," I said, patting her hand. "Then that is what we will do. You will have your dream. My legacy to you will be your independence, not their dependency." Chloe left my house that day with a quiet resolve in her eyes. The pawn had been removed from the chessboard. I had no doubt that she recounted my offer to her parents, and I could only imagine the mixture of fury and frustration that followed. I had outmaneuvered them, securing my granddaughter's future while simultaneously reinforcing the wall around my own finances. The failure of their emotional gambit would, I knew, force them into a corner. The following day, I met with Mr. Chen. We finalized the paperwork for Chloe's educational trust, funding it from Arthur's Breakwater account. It felt like the truest fulfillment of his last wish, protecting his legacy by investing it in the future, not by letting it be frittered away on the present. Once that was settled, Mr. Chen looked at me from across his desk. "The defensive phase is complete," he said. "The gates are secure. The heir is protected. They have lost their primary points of leverage, your money and your granddaughter. Now we shift from defense to offense. It is time to redefine the terms of this entire relationship." He had been drafting a document. He turned his monitor toward me so I could read it. It was a letter addressed to Mr. and Mrs. David Vance. The letterhead was stark and official. The tone was glacial. "For years," Mr. Chen explained, "the financial arrangements in your family have existed in a gray area of ambiguity. They have called it help, support, gifts. This has allowed them to operate without accountability. This letter removes all ambiguity. It reframes every major transaction not as a gift, but as what they sometimes claimed it was, a loan. We are now formally calling in the debt." I read the letter. It was a masterpiece of cold, factual accounting. It began by stating that he was writing on my behalf to address a series of significant monetary transfers made over the past 10 years. It then listed them one by one in a brutal, itemized column. R. Undocumented familial loans. Date, date. Amount, amount. Purpose, down payment on primary residence. Date, date. Amount, amount. Purpose, capital for Vance Consulting startup. Date, date. Amount, amount. Wire transfer for emergency travel expenses. Date, date. Amount, amount. Purpose, undisclosed family vacation. Date, date. Amount, amount. Purpose, contribution to boutique property development. Each item was a ghost from my past, now given a name and a number. The list was long, far longer than I had even pieced together myself. Mr. Chen's paralegal had cross-referenced my journals with the bank statements to create an exhaustive, undeniable record. The language was sterile, stripped of all emotion. There was no mention of love, of family, of birthdays, or crises. There were only dates, amounts, and purposes. The flooded basement was there. The Italian emergency was there. The final, humiliating birthday check was there. The letter continued, noting that despite the recurring nature of these substantial transfers, my records indicated no formal repayment schedule had ever been proposed, nor had any repayment been made to date. It calculated a running total at the bottom of the list, an astronomical figure that made me physically recoil. Seeing it all tallied up in one place was horrifying. It was the price tag of my silence. The final paragraph was the killing blow. It formally requested that David and Sarah, or their legal counsel, contact Mr. Chen within 10 business days to arrange a meeting. The purpose of the meeting would be to establish a legally binding repayment plan for the outstanding balance. It concluded with a chillingly polite sentence. "We trust we can resolve this matter amicably to avoid the necessity of more formal legal proceedings." It was a declaration of war, written in the polite, implacable language of the law. "This will transform the entire dynamic," Mr. Chen said as I finished reading. "They are no longer your disappointed children. They are your debtors. You are no longer their emotional support system. You are their creditor. Their usual tools, guilt, manipulation, feigned concern, are useless against a demand letter. This document speaks the only language they will now be forced to understand, the language of legal and financial consequences." "They will be furious," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes," he agreed without hesitation, "they will be. Their entire narrative, in which you are the difficult, confused mother and they are the dutiful, burdened children, has just been legally invalidated. We have seized control of the story. From now on, this is not a family drama. It's a debt collection." I gave him the authorization to send it. The letter would go out by registered mail that afternoon, requiring a signature upon receipt. There would be no denying they had received it. Walking out of his office, I felt a sense of terrifying and profound liberation. The letter was more than a legal tactic. It was a translation. It had taken 10 years of unspoken pain, of quiet sacrifice, of corrosive resentment, and it had translated it into a clear, concise, and undeniable demand. It had taken their version of the story, a sprawling, messy epic of love and obligation, and edited it down to a single, stark invoice. For the first time, the bill for their love was coming due. The demand letter detonated the quiet. They didn't call Mr. Chen. They didn't consult a lawyer. They came directly to me. Their arrival was not an ambush this time. It was a full frontal assault. David's car screeched to a halt in my driveway, and he and Sarah marched up the walk, their faces twin masks of theatrical rage. The doorbell shrieked, followed by furious pounding on the wood. I was prepared. On the coffee table, I had arranged my arsenal. The neat accordion file of bank statements, my yellow journal, Arthur's ledger, and my smartphone cued to the recording of our last meeting. This was not a negotiation. It was a final presentation of facts. I opened the door. "This is not a good time," I said, my voice betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. David pushed past me into the house, Sarah right behind him. He was waving the letter from Mr. Chen's office. "What is the meaning of this garbage?" he yelled, his face crimson. "Undocumented familial loans? Are you insane? This was family helping family. This was love." Sarah advanced on me, her eyes blazing. "How dare you, after all we've done for you, all the time we've spent, to turn on us like this? To send this disgusting piece of paper? You're a spiteful, ungrateful old woman." They stood in the center of my living room, radiating a frantic, cornered energy. They had lost control, and it was making them reckless. "Sit down," I said. It was not a request. To my surprise, the sheer, quiet authority in my voice made them hesitate. They remained standing, but their tirade paused. "We are not here to shout," I continued, gesturing to the evidence laid out on the table. "We are here to review the facts." David scoffed, crumpling the letter in his fist. "Facts? The fact is you're being manipulated by some shyster lawyer who's poisoning you against your own family. The fact is you're clearly not capable of making sound decisions anymore." And there it was, their final threat, the one they had hinted at during the wellness check. "If you continue with this insane fantasy," David said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl, "we will have no choice. We will protect you from yourself. We will talk to a judge. We will get you the help you need. We will have you declared incompetent." The threat hung in the air, thick and ugly. It was the nuclear option, the ultimate act of filial betrayal, intended to terrify me into submission. A few months ago, it would have worked. Now it was merely their final, predictable move in a game I now fully understood. I calmly picked up my smartphone from the table. Incompetent, I mused softly. That's an interesting legal term. It suggests a person is erratic, paranoid, and making terrible decisions. Does that sound right? I pressed play. My own voice, recorded and clear, filled the room. My wellness, I heard myself say. Is that what this is? A wellness check? Then came David's recorded voice, loud and furious. Yes, and frankly, you're failing it. You're erratic, you're paranoid, and you're making terrible decisions. If you won't let us help you, we'll have to find other ways to ensure you're taken care of for your own good. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was absolute. The blood drained from David's face. Sarah looked as if she'd been slapped. They stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. That, I said quietly, is a recording of you threatening to have me declared incompetent as a direct response to me cutting off your access to my money. A judge might find that interesting. It's Exhibit A. I gestured to the accordion file. This is Exhibit B, a decade of financial records that show a clear, undeniable pattern of funds flowing in one direction from my accounts to yours. It includes the documentation for a vacation you took right after telling me you needed money for a flooded basement. Sarah flinched. And this, I said, placing my hand on my journal and Arthur's ledger, is Exhibit C. A contemporaneous log of your requests, your promises, and your emotional appeals cross-referenced with the withdrawals. It is a meticulous record. I let the weight of the evidence settle in the room. I had stripped them of their narrative. They were not caring children. They were debtors. They were not victims of my confusion. They were perpetrators of a calculated, long-term exploitation. You have two choices, I said, my voice as hard and clear as diamond. You can accept the terms of the letter and work with my lawyer to establish a repayment plan. It will be a long and difficult road for you, but it will be a private one. Or you can pursue this fantasy of having me declared incompetent. If you choose that path, all of this, I swept my hand across the table, becomes public record. This recording, these bank statements, this journal, everything. I will fight you, and I will win. And the world will know exactly what you have been doing for the last 10 years. David stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The rage had been replaced by a dawning, sickening horror. He was seeing the end game, the checkmate he had never anticipated. You called it support, I said, my voice dropping, each word precise and weighted. You called it family. You called it love. I stood up, looking down at my son, no longer a giant of intimidation, but a man diminished by his own greed. My lawyer has a different name for it. I leaned in and delivered the final, defining sentence. He calls it fraud. The word fraud was a bomb that detonated the entire structure of our family. In the ringing silence that followed, they did not argue. They did not rage. They simply crumbled. The fight went out of them, extinguished by the cold, hard weight of the evidence I had laid at their feet. They left my house that day not as angry children, but as defeated litigants. And I did not see them again. That was 6 months ago. The ensuing battle was fought not in my living room, but through the sterile, dispassionate exchange of legal letters between Mr. Chin and the lawyer they were forced to hire. Faced with an audio recording, a decade of financial statements, and a clear case for both civil and potentially criminal action, they folded. They chose the quiet humiliation of a settlement over the public disgrace of a court case. The agreement is now in place. They had to sell the house I helped them buy. I imagine Sarah's diamond bracelet, the one purchased with my flooded basement money, was among the first assets to be liquidated. Every month on the 15th, I receive a notification from my bank. An automatic deposit has been made into my account. The amount is modest, a fraction of what was taken, a payment that will continue for the rest of their lives. It is not the money I cared about. It is the accounting. It is the cold, digital proof of a debt acknowledged, a consequence enforced. The silence in my house is different now. It is no longer the hollow, lonely quiet of a life spent waiting for the next request. It is a deep, resonant peace. It is the sound of my own thoughts, clear and uninterrupted. The painful amputation of my son from my life is a grief I carry, a dull ache that surfaces on rainy afternoons or when I see a mother and son laughing in the grocery store. But it is a clean wound now, no longer the festering, gangrenous sickness of a relationship built on lies. Some losses, I have learned, are a form of salvation. My relationship with Chloe is my own. She is thriving at Georgetown. I receive postcards from her, filled with stories of lectures and new friends. Her tuition is paid directly from the trust, a clean transaction between her university and my legacy. Her gratitude is her own, untainted by her parents' agenda. In her, I see Arthur's pragmatism and my own rediscovered resilience. The Breakwater Fund he built to protect me is now protecting the future. That feels like the truest definition of legacy. This morning, I sat in my armchair, the same chair where I had once shrunk under the weight of their demands. The winter frost has given way to a bright spring. Sunlight streamed through the clean windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. On the table beside me, Arthur's ledger sits not as a painful reminder, but as a closed book, its purpose served. My yellow journal is tucked away in a drawer, a testament to a journey I have completed. I am in full possession of my life. My finances are my own, my decisions are my own, my time is my own. I have started a small endowment at the local library, a literacy program for adults in my and Arthur's names. It is a quiet, steady contribution, a legacy built not on property developments and quick returns, but on the enduring power of knowledge. My home no longer feels like a resource to be tapped or a stage for their dramas. It is a sanctuary. It is a room of my own in a life of my own, and its quiet is the sound of my own name finally being spoken in my own voice. Eleanor's story is a powerful reminder that the most difficult boundaries to draw are often with the people we have loved the longest. It shows us that true strength isn't about winning a fight, but about the quiet, resolute decision to reclaim one's own peace and dignity. Her journey teaches us that a legacy is not just what you leave behind, but the life you choose to live for yourself. We hope Eleanor's journey offered a moment of reflection, as these are the kinds of conversations we cherish here at Sylora Stories. We would be honored to hear your perspective in the comments. When Eleanor made the counteroffer to fund Chloe's education directly through a trust, she protected her granddaughter, but also solidified the break with her son. What would you have done in that incredibly difficult position? Thank you for spending this time with us. Until we meet again, take care. Next time, we'll share the story of a man who uncovers a secret his father took to the grave, one that could either save or shatter his family.